For those of you who don't know, Metal Gear Solid has a few voice lines sprinkled in. Yep, just a few. Greetings, fellow people, it is I, Jag. Welcome back to the average canonical Metal Gear Retrospective. There's a lot to cover with this hunk of a game, so I'll keep this short. This is one of the most iconic and legendary games ever made. So many popular video game references come from this game, and for most, this was their first introduction to the world of Metal Gear. It showcased what the original PlayStation could do with its combination of computing horsepower and the benefits of CD-ROM technology. While the game did still ship with 2 discs, the sheer amount of dialogue in cutscenes in this game was still awe-inspiring considering when it came out. It was like a fully fleshed out stealth action movie that you could play, something that had never been accomplished at this scale in 1998. This game put Kojima on the map. While the other Metal Gear games did well enough for what they were, Kojima's directing style had room to stretch its legs with this game, and Kojima would soon become legendary in the gaming community after the fact. If you look online, you can get all kinds of information on how he made the game, and I would recommend you do so if you're interested in Kojima or this game. I will head into a story summary of this game, so if you don't want any spoilers, skip to this time above. I'll try to be as brief as possible when going through this game's story, though looking at the time placed above, you know this game is far from brief. A group of Foxhound members defected from the United States and hijacked a nuclear weapons facility somewhere in Alaska called Shadow Moses. Under the command of Liquid Snake, they threatened the US government, saying that if the government doesn't give them the remains of Big Boss and $1 billion in ransom within 24 hours, they will launch a nuclear weapon. Seeing as that's not preferable, the Secretary of Defense enlists the help of Colonel Campbell to enlist the help of Solid Snake in the hope that he can save the day. Snake's mission is to stop the terrorists and rescue the DARPA chief and the president of Arms Tech, as they were both high-ranking officials who were captured when Shadow Moses was taken under siege. On this mission, Snake is assisted by the returning Colonel Roy Campbell, the lead of the operation and the place for general information about the operation's goals. You also have the returning McDonald Miller, or Master Miller, who, like previously, is your survival expert. New to the team is Mei Ling, more or less the creator of Snake's communication device, the Codec, in addition to the Soliton radar. Last but not least, there's Naomi Hunter, the person in charge of the magic that is nanomachines. Before the game starts, she loads up Snake with an assortment of nanomachines that explain why Snake acts like a video game character. While there are technically others who help through the codec, those are the main supporting characters worth knowing. Once Snake sneaks in, he quickly locates the DARPA chief, who confirms that the terrorists do indeed have a way to launch a nuclear weapon, though they would need 2 passwords, one from the DARPA chief and the other from the Arms Tech president. They already received the password from the DARPA chief via the psychic Psycho Mantis and his mind-delving powers. Luckily, if Snake can get a hold of specific security cards, he'll be able to disarm their nuclear abilities. To make matters worse, the DARPA chief reveals that the facility contains a new Metal Gear prototype, Metal Gear Rex. The DARPA chief then starts asking oddly specific questions before suddenly having a heart attack. He dies, leaving Snake with questions about his current mission, though Campbell tries to persuade Snake that everything is more or less fine. On his way out of the cell, there's a confrontation with a female soldier who thinks Snake killed the DARPA chief. Snake doesn't have much time to defend himself against her accusations, as armed forces swarm the room, and Snake and the mysterious soldier have to fight them off. The soldier runs away, but not without a unique camera shot. Snake starts blowing up some walls until he finds the Arms Tech president strapped to a bunch of C4. Snake then duels with Revolver Ocelot, and partway through, a cybernetic ninja appears, slices off Ocelot's hand, goes haywire, and leaves. Snake is left alone to talk with the president, from which he learns vital information. Metal Gear was apparently a last-ditch effort from the company to stay afloat, as their last attempt failed because the Air Force didn't use their jet design they developed. While it appeared that mass nuclear disarmament was in effect worldwide, it should surprise no one that everyone still had nukes. For the US to still control everyone like usual, they would need an even more powerful weapon, Metal Gear. At some point while Shadow Moses was under siege, President Baker managed to give the special keys to a mysterious female soldier, the woman Snake had met previously. Baker then forgets the soldier's codec frequency, so he breaks the fourth wall and tells Snake to look at the back of the CD cover to find it. He also tells Snake that he will need to track down Dr. Hal Emmerich, the lead engineer of the Metal Gear project, on how to stop it if things get out of hand. After giving Snake an optical disc of all sorts of info and test data on Metal Gear, Baker suddenly has a heart attack. His final words are cursing the Pentagon and telling Snake that he's being used. Snake contacts his superiors again, only receiving feeble answers to all the questions Snake has. Snake knows something is up, but he continues along nonetheless. Snake calls the frequency and officially meets the mysterious soldier, Meryl. Meryl, the niece of the Colonel, was previously mentioned as being stationed in Shadow Moses. She was there as a soldier before things were under siege, and now she's disguised as an enemy soldier to remain inconspicuous. After getting acquainted, Meryl tells Snake where to find the doctor and opens a path to get there. Here he crosses into another member of Foxhound, Vulcan Raven. After managing to take out his tank with nothing but hand grenades, Snake makes it to the building where Dr. Emmerich presides. The robotic ninja from before is ahead of Snake as he easily slashes through all the guards. Snake then duels with the ninja where Snake comes out on top. Throughout the fight, the ninja says things confirming that he knows a lot about Snake, and after the fight, it's revealed that he is Grey Fox. While he died in Zanzibar land, scientists retrieved his body and revived him by doing all sorts of gene therapy and robotics testing on him. For over 4 years, he was subject to unethical testing. 2 years prior to the game's events, a lab accident caused an explosion that allegedly killed Grey Fox. However, we see that's farthest from the case. Naomi knows all this information, and Snake questions why she didn't tell him sooner. She says it's classified information, but seeing as Grey Fox appeared earlier and Naomi didn't mention anything about it, it seems likely she's hiding information. While Grey Fox did leave the battle wounded, Snake knows he'll see him again, as Grey Fox's goals seem closely tied to fighting Snake again. Snake then grabs Dr. Emmerich out of a locker and interrogates him about Metal Gear. Snake was under the assumption that the Doctor had made Metal Gear as a nuclear launching weapon, though Emmerich denies this. Emmerich's employers told him that while Metal Gear was designed to launch missiles, it was strictly for defense against nukes. Due to its mobility, it would have the potential to shoot down any incoming missiles within a moment's haste. When Emmerich realizes that Snake is right that Arms Tech was only going to use it as a weapon, he is troubled by the thought that, unbeknownst to him, he developed the most dangerous weapon in human history. To make matters worse, Emmerich is able to piece together that the Metal Gear Rex's railgun would likely be used for a new type of nuke one of the Arms Tech partners was developing. The stakes are higher than ever, though Emmerich promises to help Snake stop the terrorists in whatever way he can. He tells Snake to refer to him as Otacon, short for Otaku Convention. Yeah, this scene really rubs it in that Otacon is a degenerate for watching anime and whatnot. Interestingly, he apparently wanted to go into engineering robotics because of mecha animes, which I guess would explain the design of Metal Gear Rex. Snake gets in contact with Meryl to look after Otacon, though during her conversation with Snake, the enemy finds her and her codec is destroyed in her escape. Snake then later meets with her in person in the women's washroom, where they talk. She only received one of the 3 override cards from Baker, so Snake still needs to locate the rest in order to disarm the terrorists' nuclear abilities. They must make it through the command room to get closer to Metal Gear. In the room, Meryl is taken control of by Psycho Mantis's psychic abilities, and Snake is forced into combat against Meryl. Snake's luckily able to defeat Psycho Mantis while avoiding hurting the mind-controlled Meryl. Afterwards, they make their way through a cave of wolves ending in a long snowy stretch of land where the communications tower lies ahead. Sniper Wolf ambushes them and Meryl is shot and left out in the open. Meryl gets melancholic and tells Snake to kill her and leave. Seeing as Snake is the hero, he says he'll find a way to save her. Snake locates a sniper rifle and anxiety meds to face off against Wolf, though as soon as Snake arrives where Meryl was last left, she's nowhere to be found. Snake shoots the sniper with a few rounds from his gun, though apparently that isn't enough to stop her as Snake gets caught while he approaches the building. Snake wakes up in the interrogation room where he finally meets the leader of the terrorist operation, Liquid Snake. Liquid tells Ocelot to interrogate Snake to learn more about the override keycards. Through the torture, Ocelot also clues Snake in that the Colonel knew about Metal Gear and its new nuclear warhead. When Snake manages to resist torture, he's locked in a cell with the now decaying body of the DARPA chief. This naturally puzzles Snake as he only saw the man die a few hours ago, though his body has already started to decompose. Luckily, Snake can make contact with his codec, and he once again grills Campbell about the truth. It turns out Campbell did know all about Metal Gear and its launching capabilities. The short of it is, the government developed Metal Gear to, again, remain in power on a global scale, and they will do anything to ensure this terrorist incident doesn't make it out to the public. Because of this, they've refused to follow the demands of bringing back the remains of Big Boss. Snake probably should have learned by now that the government is only good at covering their behinds in situations like this, so Snake moves on. Snake is given another round of torture before being locked up in his cell again. Snake then tricks the prison guard and manages to escape, heading to the communications tower to get to the other side where Metal Gear is stored. He's chased up the stairs where he eventually faces off against Liquid Snake in a Hind D. Since Snake has had at least 2 other times he's taken out an attack helicopter, this one goes down in no time. With Liquid seemingly defeated, Snake tries to make it down the elevator on the other side of the building when cloaked soldiers suddenly ambush him. He deals with them easily enough, and with that, he's out on the other side of the communications tower. Snake then faces off against Sniper Wolf, much to the dismay of Otacon. Before the terrorist invasion, there were wolves on the base that Otacon took care of. When the terrorists arrived, they would have killed all the animals if Sniper Wolf hadn't intervened. Even while Otacon was in captivity, she allowed him to feed the animals from time to time. Otacon has a sweet spot for her, but unfortunately she's dead set on ending Snake's life. Snake comes out as the victor, and Otacon, while sad that Wolf died, says he'll still help Snake stop Metal Gear. Snake makes it into the facility where he has to face off against Vulcan Raven before heading to where Metal Gear is stored. Vulcan clues Snake in that the DARPA chief that he saw die was Decoy Octopus, which would explain the rotting of the real DARPA chief's corpse. After dealing with the machine gun maniac, Snake makes his way up to the command room of the Metal Gear facility where he can input the override cards. During his climb up, he receives a codec call from Otacon. Otacon was able to hack into the private files of President Baker, and he notes some troubling findings. The Metal Gear Rex's railgun is confirmed to be what fires the new type of nuclear warhead. Since the warhead won't use any kind of fuel, this nuclear projectile wouldn't be considered under any nuclear regulations set so far. It doesn't use any propulsion outside of its initial velocity, and it's essentially just a nuclear bullet, so it can't be tracked by modern radars, meaning it's a stealth nuke. Thankfully, Otacon notes how Snake does in fact have all 3 override key cards. It's just a matter of their form. By increasing or decreasing the temperature, the cards will change shape. Snake makes it up to the command room where Liquid and Ocelot discuss their plans. They plan to launch the railgun nuke at a Chinese nuclear facility to start an avalanche of effects in their favor. The US will have to divulge information about Metal Gear and the terrorist takeover to stop a nuclear war against them. This will cause them to be disgraced and disowned by the UN because of their underlying motives around nuclear disarmament and restrictions. Then the terrorists will then sell Metal Gear and the nuclear technology to the highest bidder, and if not, they will still have the world's most dangerous weapon with a stockpile of atomic weapons lying around. Once they leave, Snake inputs the override cards in order by changing the card's form via temperature. While he's running around changing the temperatures, he gets multiple calls from Master Miller. Throughout the codec calls, Miller exposes Naomi by investigating her backstory, as her backstory is filled with contradictions to reality. Naomi injected Snake with a virus called Foxdie. Foxdie kills specific people based on what it's programmed to do. When she injected Snake with nanomachines, she also injected him with a Foxdie virus designed to kill the members of Foxhound and the Arms Tech president. Since Snake was close to Baker and Decoy Octopus, Snake unknowingly transmitted a virus to them, which caused a heart attack. Snake and Miller tell the Colonel about this, and Naomi is placed under arrest. Naomi, however, manages to call Snake in secret while she's held in containment. She confirms that she did inject Snake with Foxdie. Naomi Hunter was an orphan who never knew her family. Frank Yeager, also known as Gray Fox, saw her on the verge of starvation one day while he patrolled in a war zone as a soldier, and shared his rations with her. After that, they became very close, and she saw him as a big brother. They were brought back to America by Big Boss, though when Big Boss and Gray Fox went back to lives as soldiers, Snake would eventually kill Big Boss and Frank Yeager. Naomi naturally wanted revenge, as the only family she ever had was killed by Snake. She joined Foxhound to one day get close enough to kill Snake. The terrorist attack was a perfect opportunity for Naomi to make contact with Snake and inject him with Foxdie. Naomi tells Snake, however, that throughout the mission, she learned that Snake wasn't the cold-hearted killer she assumed him to be. Before her codec call is interrupted, Naomi tells Snake that while she wanted to inject Snake with Foxdie, she was actually ordered to do so in the case of this operation. This confounds Snake, and when he demands that Campbell tell him what she meant, Campbell ignores Snake's questions and says that he must stop Metal Gear and that Snake has no time for questions. When Snake inputs the final card key, the Metal Gear is armed, much to his dismay. It turns out that Liquid and the others were unsuccessful in retrieving the DARPA chief's code for arming Metal Gear. They were only bluffing until Snake accidentally activated the Metal Gear with the override keys. This is all revealed to Snake as Master Miller turns out to be Liquid. Liquid disguised himself as Miller after he killed him so he could keep tabs on Snake during the operation. Snake was once again a pawn to someone else's goals. Liquid, now with a fully primed Metal Gear, demands the Foxdie vaccine and the body of Big Boss. He naturally wants the vaccine, as he likely came into contact with it when they were torturing Snake. It turns out the Pentagon gave Naomi her orders to inject Snake with Foxdie. It was designed to kill all the people who knew about Metal Gear and those they couldn't trust. This strain of Foxdie had the ex-Foxhound unit and the Arms Tech president programmed in to ensure no information about this situation got out. In addition to the vaccine from the US government, he reveals he wanted the body of Big Boss so he could study his DNA. As alluded to previously in the story, Snake and Liquid are brothers of sorts. Solid and Liquid Snake were born as a cloning project called Les Enfants Terribles, or in English, the Terrible Children. The US government conducted this experiment to clone/engineer the strongest soldier, using the legendary Big Boss as a genetic base. There were 8 fetuses in total, though 6 were aborted, so only 2 remained. Those 2 children were Snake and Liquid. Liquid knew of his origins for most of his life, and he was frequently told that Snake was the dominant twin, and that they only used Liquid to isolate all the recessive and weak genes so that Snake would have the best genes. The government's other effort to create powerful soldiers was through the Genome Soldiers. The Genome Soldiers were the soldiers Snake fought and snuck around for most of the game. Long story short, Big Boss was a genetic base for these soldiers through gene therapy as well. Liquid needs the DNA of Big Boss so that he can use it to ensure the survival of himself and his genome army. If there were ever a disease, genetic failure, or nanomachine targeting virus that would be effective against Big Boss, it would also be able to wipe out Liquid and his soldiers. Liquid then goes on a tangent about how all living creatures are tied to focusing on passing one's genes. The only reason Liquid does this for his genome army is simply out of a survival instinct. not compassion. Snake then fights off against Metal Gear with the help of Gray Fox. Unfortunately, Gray Fox sacrifices his life for Snake to get an opportunity to destroy Metal Gear. Gray Fox had been longing for the day he could die, so he was happy that he was finally able to be at peace with helping Snake. The Metal Gear is taken down, though the stakes remain high. Snake contacts Campbell, who tells Snake that he was just removed from leading the operation by order of the Secretary of Defense. The Secretary of Defense says that since Metal Gear is no longer a threat, he now has ordered a nuclear strike on Shadow Moses to cover up the situation. He gives Snake the option to provide the Pentagon with the optical disc full of Metal Gear test data, meaning they would wait until Snake safely made it out of the facility before continuing the airstrike. Since Snake had it taken from him during the interrogation, and he likely wouldn't give it to a power-hungry government official regardless, the Secretary of Defense continues his airstrike orders. Before Snake can attempt to escape the facility, he must face off against Liquid one final time to save Meryl, as I guess Liquid was able to grab her quickly while Snake was unconscious from the explosion of Metal Gear Rex. The two fight it out, with Snake being victorious. Meryl and Snake then try to drive away and escape the facility, though Liquid, somehow managing to survive the fall off Metal Gear, gives chase close behind. Right at the exit, the vehicles crash into one another. Before Snake and Meryl can get up from the flipped vehicle, Liquid approaches them, ready to finish them off when Fox Die starts to kick in. Liquid soon has a heart attack like Decoy Octopus and President Baker. Snake then gets a call from Roy Campbell saying that the Secretary of Defense was just arrested. It turns out that all of the Metal Gear business was entirely orchestrated by the Secretary of Defense, and the President of the US knew nothing about it. Once Campbell contacted the President and told him about the situation, the President quickly arrested the man in charge and ordered off the airstrike. It turns out that Campbell was so secretive towards Snake throughout the operation because the higher-ups placed Meryl in the facility as a way to make sure that Campbell wouldn't do anything to jeopardize the mission, even if it was against his moral code. Campbell is then forgiven by Snake, though Snake is still left worried by some of the events. He then transfers to a call with Naomi. Snake wonders when Naomi believes he will die from Fox Die, as his genetically similar brother, Liquid, was affected by the virus. Naomi then gives the poorest answer anyone with a deadly virus in their system could ask for. She says everyone dies eventually, so Snake should live out his best life. Snake and Meryl then find a snowmobile, and they head out, riding into the sunset. After the credits roll, we hear the voice of Revolver Ocelot talking to someone. Ocelot tells the man that he managed to get the Metal Gear test data and that he was able to keep his cover intact. The only person that knew Ocelot's true identity was the DARPA chief, who Ocelot purposefully killed during a torture session. It's revealed that while Liquid believed himself to be inferior to Snake, Snake was actually the genetically inferior one. This makes sense as, during the final fistfight, Snake has to hit Liquid around 6 times to match the amount of health Liquid can deplete from Snake with one hit. Ocelot then identifies the person he's talking to as the third child of Les Enfants Terribles, Solidus, and he's also the president of the US. So Ocelot was a secret agent for the president this entire time, neither working for the Pentagon, the terrorist, or Campbell's operation. And that, my friends, is a more or less complete summary of most of the essential things to the story of Metal Gear Solid. Due to the sheer volume of cutscenes and voice lines, I'm unable to list every minute detail of this story, like how Gray Fox apparently killed Naomi's parents, or the contents of all the bosses' many speeches. The bosses follow a formula for a good chunk of their dialogue before or after a fight. They will usually tell Snake about their sad origin story, typically comment on how dangerous or morally corrupt Snake realistically is, and then compare him to Liquid in some way, shape, or form. Other themes in this game are that nukes are bad, governments suck, soldiers get no respect, soldiers need military conflict for meaning, and the past doesn't have to define who you are. Snake and Liquid are essentially the same, the only difference between them being that Liquid focused on his past / his origin, and was tied down to that fate, while Snake was living for himself, not bogged down by previous identities or anything like that. Again, there is more I could talk about, however, I don't want to spend an hour on a story summary, though I know that may be in my future, seeing as Metal Gear Solid 2 and 4 are somewhat notorious for this fact. For the most part, this game has a pretty good blend of story and gameplay. I enjoyed this game's pace and dialogue, though I can see where some people may waver in their opinions of it. Most of the writing and voice lines are impactful and still very engaging to this day, though there are a handful of examples where I felt either the writing or voice direction fell flat. From my perspective, they weren't atrociously bad or anything like that, just corny, out of place, or cringy. Still, if you want to get the most out of this game's story, play it yourself, as even if you know a plot summary, it's still an overall good time to get all the details and have the cutscenes and voice lines play out. You may not like this game as much if you aren't into codec conversations for exposition and informational dumps. Speaking of the game, yes, there is gameplay to talk about in this video. For those who didn't watch the video I did on Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, I won't go in depth with everything regarding some aspects of the gameplay. On a fundamental level, this game has been said to be a remaster or redo of Metal Gear 2. The story hits a lot of the same beats and set pieces, and many of the items and gameplay mechanics remain intact. Metal Gear Solid takes everything Solid Snake did and brings it into the next generation. In my opinion, the transition between hardware is similar to The Legend of Zelda's 2D to 3D change. Link to the Past's core gameplay and story beats transitioned very nicely into Ocarina of Time. They took what worked well and did their best to replicate and recreate it with far more advanced hardware. Metal Gear's jump from an 8-bit computer system to a 32-bit 3D capable machine like the PlayStation was huge. Everything in this game is 3D, outside of the codec conversations of course, allowing for more expression and varied gameplay. This game does better than the last at giving detail and density to the world Snake sneaks through. Instead of being limited to one screen, the screen now actually scrolls and moves along with Snake, which naturally helps improve the game's flow. Snake's radar, while technically giving a smaller view of what's around you, gives a far more detailed and helpful sketch of the area. The most prominent upgrade to the radar is the ability to see cones of visions of enemies or cameras. They give the actual viewing distance and cone of their vision, as well as changing colors if an enemy hears or sees something suspicious. Yes, the enemy AI in this game has once again been fleshed out to act more realistically. Still far from what it will become in the games coming up, but still better than the games prior. Another change of note is Snake's inventory system. You can bring up a scrolling menu for equipment or weaponry with the press of either the left or right triggers. These menus and their functionality are more or less the same as the previous game, though this time it is much snappier and more creatively designed than a bland black menu. Snake receives some new items as well as revamped old ones. Things like RC and Stinger missiles are done in the first person now. You now have an assortment of goggles that augment your vision, and some items, like the guns, act more or less how they worked previously. One area I'd like to praise is that key cards now stack. You still have to equip the card on your equipment menu when you need to enter into a door, though it's nice that as soon as you gain a new card, you can enter any door with a value equal to or below that card. The doors also have numbers attached to them. Some of them can be hard to see, though it's still an improvement, as I had times when I remembered a door having a certain security level, and when I backtracked around that area, a light went off in my head, and I remembered that I would now have access to that room. This helps to streamline game progression by making it easier to know where and when you can go, and even giving a sense of excitement when you know that now you can see what's on the other side of the door. One thing that does remain a reality is backtracking, though it's still better than the last game. The combination of fast walking speed, slight changes in enemy formations when returning to areas, and unique codec calls make retreading old rooms not so bad. The worst case in this game is when you have to change the keycard's temperature. The fact that it's right before the game's climax and now you have to spend a bunch of time walking and waiting for a card to change temperature kills some of the suspense. While this game is generally better than Metal Gear 2, there are some things I don't necessarily think it does better. For one, the colors in this game are rather dark, while Metal Gear 2 had a more generous helping of color. While I believe the darkness does a great job of setting the atmosphere, there were many times where I felt it was hard to see where I was going or where I needed to crouch down to crawl under something. Again, an overall minor complaint, but it is something I did notice nonetheless. Again, perhaps there was an issue with the brightness level of what I was playing on, though even looking back on the footage on my computer monitors, it shows a relatively dark image. One area that is technically better than the last game is control. You can now move in 8 directions compared to the last game's 4. For a game like this, 8 directions are enough to walk around comfortably. What's not so comfortable in this game, unfortunately, is the combat. While I believe the control is better than the last game, the amount the game demands from the player in fights is heavily imbalanced. Aiming in this game can be frustrating as you now have to account for multiple angles. While you may have difficulty quickly lining up your shots for the enemies, your enemies will not have this problem when effortlessly having a perfect aim. Their bullets can stun and even knock Snake down. In some interactions with enemies or boss fights, getting hit means the enemy or enemies will be able to strike you multiple times before you can even get a chance at reshooting them. Snake has access to a punch and kick combo, though for some reason, I wasn't always able to initiate it reliably. This, in combination with having to account for various angles, meant that there were many times, especially in boss fights, where I would go in for a combo. However, I would either miss entirely or only hit them once, giving them a window to either hit me or initiate their invincibility frames with minimal damage, thus prolonging the battle. Boss fights in this game have far more meaning than they ever did in the previous games. They're given more fleshed out characters, and their battles are a test of your abilities. Each one is a puzzle that you have to figure out how to approach tactically. While I like this idea, my issues with the combat system made most bosses a pain to deal with. Again, these boss fights would all be pretty good if perhaps the controls or the demands were more forgiving towards the player. I'm sure if I played this game again, I would have a better feel for the controls and whatnot, though I still believe this game for a first-time player could be better, as I believe the controls are something that most players may have to fight with on their first playthrough. Again, I could be a stupid baby boy gamer, though those are my opinions. Luckily, checkpoints are pretty forgiving with this game, as at worst, you'll only have to walk for 30 seconds before facing the obstacle that killed you. Like my previous videos, I used the Mr. FPGA for this game, though this time on a consumer CRT TV hooked up with component cables. I used this 8-bit DOE controller, which is about as close to an original PlayStation controller as I could use for the Mr. I do have an original PlayStation and original controllers, and overall, I prefer these controllers in my hand. Unfortunately, recording from the actual hardware is far more complex than hardware emulation. While there are these things called snack adapters which allow for original controllers to interface with the Mr. for their corresponding cores, I don't have one, and I'm not sure if I'll pick one up in the future. With early and chunky 3D games like this, I think if I were going to re-record this game, I would go into a software emulator and boost the rendering resolution. While this game looks good on a CRT, a straight 240p to 1080p is somewhat lacking, as while a pixelated look is suitable for a pixel art game, I think I would have preferred the clarity of an emulator for recording footage, even if it would seem mismatched at times. Here's a demonstration of what I'm talking about. The emulator I used was DuckStation, which is by far the most robust PS1 emulator to date. Luckily, I shouldn't have this problem for my next video, but I thought it was something I should mention. I should note that with this game, as soon as you beat it, you'll get a rank stating how good you did at the game. It'll show you some stats on how you played the game, and you'll get a code name. This naturally incentivizes playing a certain way and playing this game multiple times. In the case of this game, beating the game quickly and without alerting the guards will net you the highest rank. If you're into that kind of thing, then go for it. However, I don't find endgame ranks to be all that interesting, and I don't see myself playing on repeat anytime soon with a game where half of it is just narrative. Perhaps I'll play the GameCube remake before I return to the PSX original, though that will still be for another day. The music in this game is also generally a step up from the last game. Music taste is, of course, subjective, though, in my opinion, I remembered and actively enjoyed more of this soundtrack than any of the games up until this point. They're still not mind-boggling or anything like that, though there were times when I stopped and noticed how I enjoyed the music composition of these tracks. It also helps that a lot of the sound design in this game is iconic, like the exclamation sound, and other tracks and motifs that would soon become standard in Metal Gear games going forward. Metal Gear Solid was an engaging time and a worthwhile sequel to Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake. While many things bugged and irritated me about certain parts of the game, I felt this experience was memorable when put together. That's really what this game is, an experience. I can perhaps outline a thing or two about Metal Gear Solid, though whether or not you'll enjoy it is something I think you'll have to discover for yourself. Please, do yourself a favor and try this game out. The other reason for the brief overview of gameplay is that I've already said much about how this stealth gameplay works in my previous Metal Gear reviews. If you feel I'm not explaining enough, I think watching those videos will get you up to speed. With how long these narratives will get, I don't think I'll have all the time in the world to go in depth about returning gameplay if it's not changed substantially. Metal Gear Solid can be played on every PlayStation console before the PS4. PS1, 2, 3, Portable, and Vita all have ways to play it, and for all that I know, they may release it on PS4/5 via emulation as they have with the other consoles. You'll likely be okay to pick up and play. If you get stuck at any point, you'll find loads of strategies or guides online. This game is a seminal work of the modern stealth game genre, and as such, I believe everyone who's ever enjoyed or had interest in the genre should play it. While this review is around double the length of my last two videos combined, I'm sure this train ride will only get longer with the following video. For the next entry of the average canonical Metal Gear retrospective, I will look at Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty. Lord have mercy on me. Thank you so much for watching the review, and as always, I was and am Jag, and I hope you all have a wonderful morning, evening, or afternoon. Take care.